From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. And now we begin with the news. The Chilean opposition won 15 out of 16 regional governments after the runoff ballot held on Sunday in the South American country. In Santiago's metropolitan region, politically the most relevant poll, the self-styled center-left coalition constitutes Unity narrow liberal left-wing alliance led by the Communist Party, with a decisive help from the President Sebastián Piñera's followers in Chile's three wealthiest districts. Turnout in Santiago's metropolitan area was just 19.2%, in part due to a general quarantine decreed by Piñera's government on Saturday. In other regions, it was even lower. In Santiago's region, a de facto anti-communist front ranging from fascist to socialist was established to support Christian Democratic former mayor and regional governor Claudio Orrego, who managed to defeat the broad front candidate and social activist Karina Oliva only by collecting massive support in right-wing strongholds. The ruling coalition was left with just one governorate, setting the scenario for the presidential elections in November, in which a communist mayor, Daniel Jadwe, leads in the opinion polls. COVID-19 continues to spread in Chile, especially in the capital, where the government had to issue total quarantine to counter the increase in contagion by the disease. The Indian nation has recorded in the last 24 hours 7,529 new cases, which brings its total closer to the 1.5 million contagions at a national level, and the unfortunate figure of 128 deaths, with which totals 30,707. This growth of 17% cases across the country has intensive care units at 98 capacity of it. Bolivian and Peruvian authorities have joined forces to vaccinate the Aymara community living in the borderline of both countries. Dozens of people line up in the Desaguadero International Bridge to get the vaccine doses. Authorities estimate more than 3 million Aymara people live in the Andean region, which is shared by Bolivia, Peru, and Chile. The Desaguadero city, 100 kilometers west of the Bolivian capital, La Paz, is an important crossing that has ceased some commercial activities during the past year by the COVID-19 pandemic. The initiative comes as Peru and Bolivia report a further surge in COVID-19 cases, which authorities believe is due to a new, more contagious variant of the virus.
And I am cheerful. I want to ask of the people in Peru and Bolivia, as siblings we are, for all to get the vaccine, for everyone to be protected against this illness. For this campaign, we have prepared 1,000 vaccines that are being delivered, but this is only a beginning. We will continue vaccination in the health centers.
In Colombia, the cases of new COVID-19 infections continue in constant increase. In the last 24 hours, the South American country recorded 28,519 new infections, to an accumulated total of almost 4 million cases. 586 new deaths were reported. According to Johns Hopkins University, Colombia is the fourth most affected country in the Americas. Dozens of Brazilians protested against the Copa America after confirming that several players gave positive for COVID-19. The demonstration was held in the city of Brasilia, where the first match of the tournament is scheduled. It has been confirmed that at least 13 people belonging to the Venezuelan delegation were infected with COVID-19 and remain confined in a local hotel. Protesters asserted that the holding of the event represents a biosafety risk at the face of the serious situation facing the South American giant with respect to the pandemic, after counting to date more than 487,000 deaths due to the disease and more than 17 million cases. Likewise, indigenous peoples protest in Brasilia in defense of their rights and against the inauguration of the Copa America. Hundreds of peaceful protesters marched to the Nané Garrincha Stadium in the city of Brasilia to express their rejection of Bill 490 that puts an end to territorial demarcations. Peoples also denounce anti-indigenous policies of Jair Bolsonaro's government and demand pandemic vaccines for the whole country without ignoring the native peoples, accusing the government of taking more care of the regional cup than its most vulnerable population. And saying in the Copa America, Brazil beat Venezuela 3-0 in the debut of Copa America. In the National Stadium of Brasilia Mané Garrincha began the first match of the Copa America between host Brazil and Venezuela in a very dense atmosphere for the sanitary situation and the protests in the South American country. The Vinotinto did what it could after 13 of their players gave positive for COVID-19. Despite the first goal he scored in 23 minutes, Venezuela played a prudent game with good defensive work. The first to score was Marquinhos, and in the complement the Neymar penalty. Before the end of the engagement, Gabigol put the third and definitive to steal the thrashing in the debut of the Copa America. At least 13 players from the Venezuelan national team have tested positive for COVID-19, a day before today's opening match of the Copa America against host Brazil. Brazilian Health Minister Marcelo Queiroga said that all players who tested positive for coronavirus will be quarantined in Brazil.
All athletes who test positive will only leave Brazil after the quarantine and having the PCR exam negative, so that when these athletes return to their country, there is no risk of carrying any type of virus they get here in Brazil. The South American Football Confederation has changed the regulations and allows at any time the replacement of these athletes who test positive for COVID-19.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. Israel's parliament has voted in favor of a new coalition government, ending Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's historic 12-year rule. Naftali Bennett, a former ally of Netanyahu turned rival, becomes prime minister, presiding over a diverse coalition confirmed by 8 parties with deep ideological differences. Netanyahu remains head of the Likud party and will hold the post of opposition leader. Sunday's vote, passed by a 60-59 margin, ended a 2-year cycle of political paralysis in which the country held 4 elections. And hundreds of people celebrate in Jerusalem after the parliament voted on a coalition that ended Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's 12 consecutive years in charge. Over the past year, Netanyahu has been accused of several corruption charges, such as accepting improper gifts and seeking to trade favors with media moguls in exchange for positive coverage. Mali's new transitional prime minister, Shogel Maiga, has taken office after being sworn in last week. The new leader brought his government together for the first time. He assigned his government to make a roadmap in preparations for upcoming elections set for February 2022. The new transitional prime minister also pledged to bring civilians back into power. Maiga is a former minister and member of the M5 protest movement, which helped to oust former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta last August. Several people have been injured and dozens others arrested during anti-government protests in Nigeria's cities of Lagos and Abuja. Nigerian police fired tear gas to disperse the protesters who were demonstrating against bad governance and security, as well as the recent Twitter ban by the government of President Muhammadu Buhari. Activists called for a nationwide protest to be staged the same day when Nigeria was celebrating its Democracy Day, which marks Nigeria's move to civilian rule more than 20 years ago.
of proper care, kidnapping, banditry. We can go on and on and on. So the people are protesting against a failed government. They are saying enough is enough. Who is the head of that government? It is the president. If the president cannot assure us, if we have even moved past the stage of assurances, if the president cannot swing into action and ensure that the lives of citizens are safeguarded, then he should resign.
And thousands have demonstrated in Burkina Faso to demand security from the government following last weekend's deadly terrorist attack. The demonstrators, who came from different parts of the country, marched in the city of Dori, blaming the government for not properly securing the area, resulting in continued attacks by militants. At least 132 people have been killed last week by armed militants in Solhan department. The demonstrations were organized several days ago by civil society organizations and local residents. Pope Francis has demanded humanitarian aid be delivered to residents of the war-torn Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. Speaking at his Sunday noon blessing, Francis said he was thinking of the people of Tigray, who have been struck by a grave humanitarian crisis that has exposed the poorest to famine. Francis also called for an immediate end to fighting in Tigray, the return of social harmony, and for all food aid and health care to be guaranteed. The United Nations and social activist groups say more than 350,000 people in Tigray are suffering famine, with millions more at risk of it.
Possible to close the eyes in front of the exploitation of children who are deprived of the right to play, to study, and to dream. According to the estimate of the International Labour Organization, today the children exploited for labor are over 150 million. It's a tragedy. This is happening today. Many children are suffering because of this. To be exploited for child labor, let's renew altogether the effort to eliminate this slavery of our times.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. Amid protests, the G7 nations group has wrapped up the busiest day of their three-day summit, having discussed a path out of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as foreign policy and climate change. The G7 leaders issued a closing declaration promising more financial support for developing countries hit by the climate crisis and funds for infrastructure projects in the developing world. Additionally, the G7 leaders meeting in Cornwall adopted measures on coal-fired power stations as part of the battle against climate change and plans to reduce emissions from farming, transport, and the making of steel and cement. And during the last day of the summit, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced that the G7 wealthy nations have pledged over 1 billion coronavirus vaccine doses for poorer nations, half of them coming from the United States.
A week ago, I asked my fellow leaders to help in preparing and providing the doses we need to vaccinate the whole world by the end of 2022. I'm very pleased to announce that this weekend leaders have pledged over 1 billion doses, either directly or through funding to COVAX. That includes 100 million from the UK to the world's poorest countries, which is another big step towards vaccinating the world. And that's in addition to everything scientists and governments and the pharmaceutical industry have done so far to roll out one of the largest vaccination programs in history.
On the other hand, social activists on Sunday dismissed the pledge from the G7 nations group to donate 1 billion vaccine doses to poorer countries. They said it was nowhere near enough to stop the global pandemic.
You know, it's funny that the communique says they will do everything they can as fast as possible, and then they talk about 1 year, 1 billion in the next 1 year. It's quite interesting to see how they think that 1 billion doses for 1 year would actually end the pandemic. That's really funny because that would not even take care of 5% of the population. And so it's kind of disappointing because the whole world was really looking up to this richest country that come together, hoping that they could mobilize as a group, to really try to end the pandemic on time. Because the longer it stays, of course, the whole world suffers from that. But we just believe that this is inadequate. It doesn't show the urgency that is required.
And the G7 group meeting in Britain have reached an agreement Sunday on different topics like the coronavirus pandemic, climate change, the global economy and foreign policy. However, climate activists said the agreement was not enough. Extinction Rebellion climate protesters have demonstrated in Cornwall on the last day of the G7 summit. Although they hope to see Joe Biden put the United States back on the right track, they are disappointed by the lack of action to tackle climate change and demand leaders stop subsidizing fossil fuels.
We just aren't in the space of promises anymore. There are things that people can do immediately. No more subsidies of fossil fuels. End of. Stop it. And they haven't been making these kind of decisive moves to get us off this fossil fuel nightmare. And the repairs to nature have to be done through the farming and food system. I'm not hearing them talking like leaders who understand the crisis that we're in.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has called for a waiver on coronavirus vaccine patents. Speaking at the G7 summit in England, the African leader reiterated that the waiver will allow African nations and other countries like India to produce enough vaccines for their people who are in desperate need of them.
And we argued that, as South Africa and India have proposed, we should waive the TRIPS process or measure at the WTO, and what we got here is a commitment that yes, the negotiations should ensue at the WTO. We're rather pleased with this. Having amassed more than 100 countries as South Africa and India in support of our proposals, we think there's been progress in the form of enabling the negotiations to happen on the text that should be looked at by all countries. And
At least 12 people have been killed and 37 seriously injured after a gas explosion at a residential neighborhood in central China. Images supplied by Chinese media show rescue workers climbing over broken concrete slabs to reach people still trapped inside. Investigations into the cause of the explosion were still going on. The explosion comes a day after 8 people were killed and 3 others injured in an accident at a chemical facility in Guiyang province.
As of 14 hours, the city's party committee and government have deployed 2,000 rescuers to carry out the search and rescue operation. A total of 913 households have been evacuated and 138 injured people have been sent to hospital for treatment, 37 of whom are severely injured. 12 people died.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.